Okay, we're recording. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're going to begin now. It is 10:31, and I think what I will do is, as the bells sort of ring, I'll just admit people. Maybe I better wait a bit. Okay. A lot of people. Okay.
My link went missing.
Sorry?
My link went missing. I can find it.
Go and ask him. Okay. I'm going to begin because it's 2 minutes after, and I'll just admit people as the bell sort of rings. So please forgive all the beeps. La Briotte, is that Lucille? Lucille, would you mind muting yourself, please? Can everyone just check that they are muted?
No, we do add to it, yeah.
Have a look at the bottom of your screen, Lucille. You'll see a mute button, unless I mute you. Okay, I've muted you, Lucille. I've muted you. Okay, not to worry. All right, welcome everybody. It's absolutely wonderful to see so many people here at this very interesting discussion that we're going to have today. And I think that I'll first introduce Pat Jacobson. For those of you who don't know Pat is originally from Port Elizabeth. She is a well-known and well-respected cookery teacher, having run a cookery school in PE from 1980 to 1992. All the while being the vice chairman of the UJW in PE, and then she came to live in Cape Town. After teaching in Cape Town until 2007, she wrote 2 cookery books. The first one called The Perfect Cook, and that sold out in 18 months. Apart from her skill in the kitchen, Pat has been one of the longest serving guides at the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Center. And I have had the privilege to work closely with her for the past 7 years. During this time, I've been constantly amazed by her willingness and enthusiasm to adapt to different methodologies, her thirst to learn more and find new ways to inspire those whom she guides through the exhibition, and her openness to constantly growing her knowledge makes working with Pat one of the great privileges for me of the work that I do. Thank you, Pat, for everything that you have given to the center in general and to me as a friend and a deeply valued colleague. I'm just going to admit, Viv, I've known for many, many years because our children grew up together, and I have watched with awe Viv's many different talents as they have emerged over the years. She is, of course, a well-known artist. She was a superb drama and English teacher, and she taught professional communications in the engineering department at UCT. Her current passion is cupcakes. And I urge you to visit her website and salivate over her edible works of art, which one doesn't actually want to eat them. Viv joined our team 2 years ago and has become so entrenched so quickly that it feels like she's been with us from the beginning. She's just part of the team. So it's just been wonderful. At the beginning of lockdown, Pat and I were chatting, and she mentioned her fascination with what happened to the Hungarian Jews and how she'd been researching the history. And we spoke about, and as our guides will know, how we always talk about the Hungarian transport and the Auschwitz album, but we never really, because we don't have the time with people we're guiding through, go sort of deeper into this history. And at the same time, I was chatting to Viv about doing book readings. Well, like any well-baked cake, you have to have the right ingredients, the right timing, and the right mix. So for our 2 chefs, bakers and historians to get together and take on this Hungarian history for us is really, I'm so grateful that you've been prepared, both of you, to take it on with such fervor and vigor and to take it forward. So I'm going to ask that if you have any questions, that you please put them either in the chat or in the Q&A. I'll pick them up, and after the talk we can have those questions. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask Viv and Pat to take over from here. I'm going to switch off my sound, I'm going to mute myself, and I'm going to invite Viv to take it from here. Thank you, Viv.
Thanks, Linda. I really, really appreciate this opportunity. That introduction was, I was trembling anyway, but that was really daunting. But here we go. Pat and I have had the most wonderful time researching and being together and working on this presentation for you today. Basically, what the point of this whole thing was that if you're going to have a reading, a book reading, which is what we were decided to do, it should in actual fact have a context. There should be some historical background into which the story would make sense. And so we embarked on this particular journey. Pat knew a lot about Hungary, and so I said to her, I would love you to shape it so that you can answer the questions that I would like. And the first one was, why were you interested in Hungary? The second one, why is it unique? Because the other European countries were all doing similar sort of things, the way that the Nazis came in, when they were deported, their story was similar. This particular story of Hungary was unique. Also, it doesn't feature much in our walkabout at the Guide Center. So again, I was really anxious to hear about that. So Pat, over to you. But before you do, I'm going to give you, I've got to have a moment just to put on some slides for you so that you can begin your talk. Please forgive me. There you go. So over to you, Pat.
450,000 Hungarian Jewish men, women, and children were murdered during the last 6 months of World War II. This was unique. This was different. Jews had lived in Hungary for centuries. They were educated. There was a time between 1848 and 1895 that was considered a golden age for Hungarian Jews. They were leaders in banking and industry, preeminent in medicine, engineering, and the law. 900,000 Jews lived in Hungary at this time. It was the second largest Jewish community in Europe. In the early 1900s, there were rumblings in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. After the assassination of the future heir to the throne, Franz Ferdinand, and his wife in Serbia by a young varsity student whose name was Gavrilo Princips, the Hungarian emperor retaliated. Germany attacked Russia, and World War I broke out in July 1914 and ended in November 1918. In the midst of this war, in 1917, a civil war broke out in Russia. The Bolsheviks, led by the Red Army, deposed the provisional government in Petrograd, which is St. Petersburg, and proclaimed Soviet rule. Lenin became the virtual dictator of the first Marxist state in the world. Communism was a big no-no in the Western world. In 1918, Germany lost World War I. The Treaty of Versailles was the punishment for Germany, and the punishment for Hungary was the Treaty of Trianon. Hungary lost 2/3 of its land and 2/3 of its people. Who was Admiral Horthy? He became Commander-in-Chief of the Austro-Hungarian Navy and attained the rank of Rear Admiral in 1918. He also became the regent of Hungary in 1920. He was styled His Serene Highness, the Regent of the Kingdom of Hungary. He remained regent until October 1944, and he played a large role in the outcome of the Jews of Hungary. At this time, there were 600,000 Jewish people living in Hungary. Because many of those involved in Bolshevik uprisings were Jews, it's a good idea to blame the Jews for World War I and for communism. Let's go back to Horthy. It was and still is difficult to gauge Horthy's mindset toward the Jewish people. Some say he wined and dined them. Others say he hated them and had nothing to do with them. Here we have right in front of us, the deportation of the Jews of Budapest must cease. And then he says, before that even, I have been an anti-Semite throughout my life. I have never had contact with Jews. I have considered it intolerable that here in Hungary, everything, every factory, every bank, large fortune, business theatre, etc., should be in Jewish hands. He was a controversial figure, and today is looked upon as a wartime leader who still divides the Hungarians. I would say he was ambivalent, doing whatever benefited at the time. From 1921 to 1931, he legislated laws against the Jews, taking away many of their privileges. Until 1931, he had 2 prime ministers working under him. They understood the need for the Jews, who had always run the economy of Hungary, and they applied these laws very loosely. However, in 1933, Hitler came into power. In 1935, the Arrow-Cross Party, heavily anti-Semitic, came into power, and by the time 1939 arrived, the Hungarian Jews had lost every single privilege that they had gained in the previous century. Let's talk a little about the labor service system. It was set up under the auspices of the Hungarian military. It included tens of thousands of men deemed by the authorities as unreliable and unworthy of carrying arms. This system applied to all minorities, especially, of course, the Jews. All the Jews who had fought as part of the Hungarian army were now a part of the labor system. World War II broke out in September 1939. Many of the Hungarian hierarchy were interested in cooperating with Hitler, but at the same time, Horthy did not want to fall completely into Germany's orbits. It must be noted that as Hungary supported Germany, Hitler did not invade Hungary. Horthy, of course, had no choice but to side with Hitler in order to get back more territory. The Hungarian army, accompanied by the labor force, were ordered by Hitler to join the German army when it went into Russia in 1941. This, of course, was Hitler's huge blunder. He had learned nothing from Napoleon. Although in 1942, the BBC had announced that there were atrocities taking place involving the Jews of Europe, the Hungarians were not well informed and had little idea of the Holocaust. They thought that Hungary was still a safe country for Jews. In 1943, the German army was having great difficulty in Russia, as you can see. They had not taken into account the very severe Russian winters and were beginning to suffer great losses. Horthy was becoming very uneasy. He did not want to be on the losing side of World War II. He indicated to the Allies that Hungary wished to defect. Hitler was furious. He knew that Germany had lost the war, and yet he took it upon himself to invade Hungary, to send the notorious Eichmann himself to Budapest to sort out the Jewish problem. And the deportations began. Here you see Jews being rounded up. Was there any help forthcoming? Immediately after the Germans occupied Hungary, and although the world had yet to learn about the atrocities perpetrated in Auschwitz-Birkenau, by March 1944, a great deal of information about the mass murders had reached the West. Against this background, on March 24th, only 5 days after the Nazis invaded Hungary, United President Roosevelt broadcast a message to the Hungarian people, warning them to refrain from committing crimes against the Jews living amongst them. Others, including Britain's Foreign Minister Sir Anthony Eden, King Gustav of Sweden, and Pope Pius XII, would follow suit over the weeks and months.
Pat, I would like to just stop there for a moment and ask you something that has happened to many people probably watching this, and that is that we've been attending a series of lectures which talk about different ways and attempts to try and save the Jews. And this actually happened with people who were very high up. Eichmann and Himmler were involved in these, they seem to be hair-raising ideas of trying to trade blood for gold. Can you tell us more about that, and particularly about something which cropped up in those lectures about Mr. Katzner and his Katzner train? Thank you.
The War Refugee Board was established to aid Jews in Europe, and it played a large role in encouraging various diplomats to help the Jews in Budapest, like Karl Lutz, like Rael Wallenberg, the International Red Cross, and the Young Zionists. As you all know, probably, Karl Lutz and Rael Wallenberg are in the Garden of the Righteous at Yad Vashem. These people all put an immense effort into aiding the Jewish people of Hungary. Then there was a Jewish Rescue Committee, and arrangements were made for Jews who could afford to pay Nazis and Hungarians. They would board trains that took them elsewhere. And this pertains to your remark, Vivienne, about the blood for money. One can stop here and think of perpetrators like Eichmann and Himmler. They knew the war was over and they wished to come out of it, preferably rich. Let's just say that much money's changed hands. And thus, for an example, a plan set up by a Jew, Rezno Katzner, saved the lives of 1,600 Jewish people. The train consisted of 36 cattle trucks that left Budapest on the 30th of June, 1944, right in the midst of the German occupations, and carried these Jews to safety in Switzerland. You can see here the Jews from the Kassel train arriving in Switzerland, etc. Let us discount the looting and look at the help and the effort to save Jews at this moment in time. This was actually unprecedented in terms of World War II and anti-Semitism as a whole. Very sadly, however, despite all the efforts, Eichmann managed to efficiently organize transports that within 6 months, from May 1944, delivered 450,000 Jewish men, women, and children to the gas chambers of Auschwitz and Treblinka. Only 220,000 Hungarian Jews survived the war.
That is extraordinary, a number of 900,000 and then down to a number of 250,000 in that very, very, very short time, and right at the very end of the war. It is truly catastrophic. I'm now going to start the book reading, which actually is particularly, if I can stop sharing, Right. My book reading comes from a book by Bella Saltz that was very kindly lent to me. It is called The 9 Suitcases. Before I actually start reading from it, I just want to tell you a little bit about the author. And the reason for that is that he so accurately reflects what was happening at the time. He was born in 1895. He went to the First World War. He was severely wounded there. But in 1941, exactly as Pat has just told you, he actually became part of that Hungarian labor force that went to the Ukraine, very badly injured there. In 1944, he was now sent to a ghetto. He was living in a city called Nagyvarad, which is far north of Hungary. And he was holed up in a particular synagogue that belonged to a rabbi. And my reading actually comes from that particular place. He was one of the ones that was on the list of Katzner. And this only revealed itself while Pat and I were working in the background. The lecturer started with these lecture course that I've mentioned before, started to talk about the Katzner affair and the controversy about it. And it so coincided with what we were doing. It seemed to be that it was actually meant for this particular presentation. When he had been saved, he was sent to Switzerland. Before that, he did, as Pat mentioned again, he stayed in the Bergen-Belsen for about 5 months till the organization managed to get him free to Switzerland. He came back to Budapest after the war and he was a particularly interesting man. He was a writer. He wrote 10 novels. He wrote 4 plays. He was very much an intellectual, apparently used to sit in bars. He was a sophisticated bohemian. I can just imagine chatting to people who had interests in culture, in politics, in philosophy. All this is evident in this particular book. The important part for me was that this book was written in 1946, a year after what you've heard now. So in some ways, it is very raw. It is horrific in times. I've tried to temper it and cut out some things that were truly too dreadful to mention. But nevertheless, he suffered. He was a witness of that. And in some ways, I expect the writing is almost as though it came off the page as it was happening. He has been, because he had this amazing gift, he's also been compared to people like Elie Wiesel, Imre Katzen, who was actually a particularly good writer, and of course Primo Levi. And although this book has moments in it that are really bad, there are moments where he has a sort of a grim, grotesque humor, if I can say that, and he also has a charm which you cannot avoid hearing, unfortunately not in these 2 pieces, but it's called 9 Suitcases, and I believe it's in the Gifford Library. So my piece begins in the ghetto, in the synagogue, and 3 young women are talking about a mattress that has been vacated because somebody died in the night. And I begin. So when the contenders for Uncle Neitzel's mattress pillaged his body in the dark, the girls fluttered and huddled. Then one of them, a tall, blonde, pretty girl of about 20 with a slight squint, separated from the group and set out unsteadily towards the Ark of the Covenant. She stopped and squatted down at the edge of my mattress. "Mr. Hirschler," she whispered. "That friendly gendarme was here just now, and he said that from tomorrow they'll be beating people up to make them admit where they've hidden the jewelry. They'll do it in alphabetical order, and my father's name starts with a B. Well, have you hidden anything?" My father has high blood pressure as well. He wouldn't be able to bear a single blow." "Well, then it might be wiser to tell so they don't hurt him." "But they'll beat him all the same." "Well then, the gendarme says," she whispered, bending closer to my ear, "that if I go to bed with him, he'll save my father. I know your real name, Mr. Hirschler. I've read things you've written. You could advise me." I wouldn't have felt particularly guilty in this situation, in this hell, this synagogue, if I had advised her to give in to the gendarme. So many things had been lost since March 19th. There were really no bogus high-flown sentiments left in me. I'm saying this as one who feels he has lost something, not only his belongings, but something very important, something vital. Above all else, I have lost my homeland. This homeland has always meant more to me than to most people around me. It exercised me feverishly when I was young, speaking and dreaming. And now, here is this blonde girl with the long legs and squint, almost touching my nose with her knees, and asking me to advise her whether or not to lose her virginity to the gendarme who's going to save her father from being beaten. What should I say to her, whose fate, by the way, leaves me frighteningly cold? In 1942, out there in Poland, I saw the field brothel, with the Jewish girls from Vienna and Bratislava pulling up weeds between the rails in their free time, cheerfully supervised by a German guard laughing luridly at them. The girls were still wearing clothes from good department stores and boutiques, albeit frayed and filthy, and half of them had bulging bellies. We were just starting out for forced labor in Russia, with our horror and pity still fresh in our minds, and they had been there for a year, corrupted by being assigned to service German soldiers in the red huts as they passed through on leave. One girl, in the last stages of pregnancy, who was carrying some moldy bread and a music, asked me, "Have you got any German books? I've just finished what I had today and I've only got a few days left to read a new one if it isn't too long." "Why have you only got a few days?" "Because I'm going to die. Wait a moment." And she counted on her fingers 17 or 18 days. "And then I'll be in labor, and then they're going to take me behind the bushes and bang, into the war cemetery." That is where they killed and buried the girls, behind the bushes, because they didn't want to get them to give birth to mongrels, and also simply because they were Jews. The girls didn't mind becoming pregnant. They didn't have the strength to commit suicide, and this was the certain death they had longed for. How am I supposed to advise this girl on whether or not she should go to bed with a gendarme? No, I'm not going to advise her. I'm not going to provide her with any authorization. She can do what she wants. I won't interfere. It's pointless for me to regard her virginity as a more complex problem at the moment than her life. All I know, and I know a lot because my friends in London sent me the detailed report from Poland, I know that all of us here are going to be gassed. "I cannot rule in the matter," I said coldly. "This is something you must decide for yourself." She was disappointed and for a while went on trying to coax an opinion from me. I could feel that she was hoping for encouragement rather than disapproval. No, I didn't give the girl any advice, and I may have been too unsympathetic, because she suddenly got up, smoothed down her skirt, threw her head back, and shot off. My next reading comes a while later, the next night, a few pages on. This is between the author and a doctor. "Now it's certain that we're going," he whispered. "The colonel has told the caterer the first transport is leaving on Saturday." "It was clear from the first moment that we were going," I answered coldly. "Listen, we'll be 70 in a wagon. What's going to happen to these old and sick people?" I was listening to him on one elbow. I shrugged stubbornly and irritably. "After all," he said, "you're one of the greatest moral authorities in the ghetto, even now in his pompous, thoroughly polished manner. Please help us doctors make a decision. Some of us insist that the doctors must fight for the lives of patients as if nothing had happened. On the other hand, there are those that favor euthanasia." I became terribly angry. Euthanasia, for God's sake, doctor. Let's drop these refinements. Perhaps you should call a conference at 6 o'clock in the banqueting room of the town hall under the auspices of the Darwin Circle to discuss principles. Let us not use such beautiful words here. Those times are over once and for all. Can't we stop being European even here? My dear sir, what we've got here is the plague, and this is a slaughterer's yard. I know he didn't deserve this rude outburst, but in this human knacker's yard, he infuriated me with his snobbery. It was as if somebody had fallen into a cesspool in his evening dress. He wasn't offended, but tried to calm me. He was a doctor and knew that in such a situation, it isn't possible to predict what will drive a person's nervous system wild. What we doctors are asking you, he continued in a simpler, less rhetorical tone, is whether we should try and save the seriously ill and the suicides or let them die. You can see clearly the issue more clearly from a philosophical and literary point of view. We doctors are bound by the Hippocratic Oath. I went on trying to decline the responsibility for making a decision, but he was right. Time was pressing. It was Wednesday morning, and they would be taking people away on Saturday. By then, we would have had to decide whether to kill them ourselves or leave them to kill others. The previous evening, the girl with the squint asked me to decide whether or not she should give up her virginity to the gendarme, and I didn't advise her. I didn't want to. I didn't dare to accept the responsibility. But now I'm sure that even this evasion was a form of protest. I was defending the virginity of a daughter of my tribe from the enemy. Well, that's a bit of an exaggeration. I didn't exactly defend her. This was no gentlemanly chivalry. In this extreme peril, the old tribal This was no gentlemanly chivalry in this extreme peril. The old tribal ritual commanded me not to abandon our women to the lascivious rage of the wild boar. And the same primeval tribal law called out in me not to abandon our wounded and sick and disable the enemy, because we knew the enemy's customs. The first thing they did would be to torture, defile, and mutilate them. I had seen the guard in the forest in the labor unit where I was in the Ukraine. He beat my comrade Manstein to death with a rifle held in both hands and then urinated on him, roaring with laughter. And I had also seen the SS raze a village near Minsk to ground because the railway line nearby had been blown up by a partisan. First, they doused the houses in petrol and set fire to them. And when the old men, women, and the children tried to escape from the rampant flames and stifling smoke, they gunned them down, one and all. Then the drunken desecration of the corpses began, the castration with bayonet or pocket knife, the mutilation of women's breasts, the smashing of heads against the wall, and the dead bodies hung on trees. Primitive cultures believe that if the murderer humiliates his victim, the victim will not be able to reach the presence of God and accuse the murderer. The rabid gendarmes out there in the town, the demonstrating, singing arrow-cross brats, God knows what they would do, given the chance, to the eyes, ears, and genitals of our wounded, to make quite sure that they couldn't accuse them in front of their God. No, let's have euthanasia. Let us kill them. Before announcing my decision, I examined myself thoroughly. After all, these people whom I was now sentencing to death were strangers. But to test myself, what would I answer to the doctor if, for example, my mother were lying there, dying, and medical assistance could save her? It wasn't until a momentary icy spasm ringing in my heart at ease that I said, let them all die in peace. Yes, I was prepared to commit matricide, fervently wishing that my mother were here and that I could kill her before she fell into their hands, before they made a mockery of her body, which I only ever dared to think of as consciously as a disguise for her soul. And that was how I killed 49 people with a single sentence. Before I leave the book reading, I'd like to turn to the preface because there's quite an interesting link that I'd like to share with you. This writer the translator was actually at the Bergen-Belsen when he was there. I'm going to read to you. It may be worth mentioning that the translator once had the opportunity to observe assaults at his close quarters for a period of 5 months. Soltz is unlikely to have taken much notice of an 11-year-old child. but the child had been told that Zoltz was an important person. Sallow-faced, emaciated, desperate for cigarettes, he gathered groups of followers around him with an air of distinction that the child could not fully understand, but could clearly sense. That time was the second half of 1944, and the place was the concentration camp of Bergen-Belsen. Thank you. Linda, over to you.
Viv, thank you so very, very much. That was really extremely poignant. I'm sure everybody felt, I don't know what to say, but I'm sure everybody felt like my heart feels, like I just want to hold it in my hands and tell it the world will be all right. Viv,
Sorry, Linda, I've forgotten such an important part, and I'm going to do this. It's supposed to be spontaneous, but can we just make it spontaneous now? And I want to go back to Pat, because in the duration, Pat told me the most wonderful story.
I was going to take us back there, so that's fabulous. So you ask Pat the question, I'll mute myself. Go ahead.
Pat, you were given a necklace, and I found the story that you told me about it so moving that I was hoping that you would share it with everyone. Pat, you've got to yes. Have you unmuted yourself? Pat? I think you must unmute yourself.
I have, yes. Okay. Right, sorry. I would like to share the story. In 2009, my husband and I went on a trip to Budapest. Of course, we went because we wanted to see things that had happened in the Holocaust, etc. And we spent 5 days there. Budapest is a beautiful city, and it was very sadly neglected during the years of communism. But slowly but surely, they're getting it together again, and there are exquisite buildings, etc. We saw everything that we were meant to see, and on the Friday afternoon, we went to have a look at the Johannes Synagogue, which is one of the biggest synagogues in Europe. It holds 3,000 people. I have to mention that Hungary has got the most beautiful synagogues I've ever seen, all over the place. And we went back to the synagogue on Sunday for a concert. It was to celebrate the retirement of a gentleman called Polgar Laszlo. He was a Jewish man, a very famous baritone, and he was retiring. He passed away the following year, so we were very fortunate to hear him sing. And of course, the introduction was all in Hungarian, and we couldn't understand a word. I was sitting next to a lady, and when the singing stopped, etc., there were other singers, famous opera stars, people who had sung at the Met, etc. It was a very special evening. I asked the lady sitting next to me if she could speak English, and she said, no, she can't speak English. But she said to me, "Where are you from?" So I said, "I'm from South Africa." And she asked why we were there. And I kind of explained to her that we'd come because we were interested in the Holocaust. And she looked at me and she said to me, "My mother was in Auschwitz." And she put her hand into her handbag and she took out this necklace and she gave it to me. She said to me, "I would like you to have this, please." And so, of course, you know, Budapest will always remain with me, always.
Thanks, Pat. That's quite a story. And in fact, your passion for this history is really evident in the way that you speak and the way that you've explained everything. So thank you very much for that. And Viv, your readings were exquisite. Does anyone in the audience have a question they'd like to ask, something they'd like explicated, explained, told in more detail? Please, if you do, you can write it in the chat. Otherwise, you can, no, you can't put your hand up. I don't see a put your hand up thing here, but you certainly can write it in the chat. Viv has told me that she has additional notes on the book. Am I right, Viv? It's on the book that you have additional notes?
No, the notes are actually on our particular presentation.
Ah, okay.
These I collected, but they've got to do with Hungary. There are lots about the Katzner trial and the book readings, some maps, and of course galleries. There were hundreds of synagogues, and I've got quite a few, especially in that golden age. I've got quite a few of them, but it's a beautiful, beautiful town, I mean, country to visit. And of course, there are other notes about what we've read today.
Okay, so Viv, can I suggest that you put those sort of additional notes into a PowerPoint, and if anybody wants, or into a document of some sort, send it to me, and anybody who wants it, I'm happy to share. Are you happy to share?
Absolutely, it's already double. It's at the end of my time.
Excellent. So I'm happy to share with anyone at this webinar. We can share, that's with pleasure. And of course, the recording of this will go onto our website, onto the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide website. So please look out for it there. You'll click on and it'll take you to YouTube to see it, our YouTube channel. And it just remains from, how is it possible, David Polovin, David, the question is, and I don't know how to answer this, but David has asked, how is it possible for a Jew to deal with the grief that stories of the Holocaust evoke every time? And I just think, David, for me, you know, I work in this center. I'm with it all the time. It doesn't go away. It doesn't go away. It sits in your heart. And I think the fact that it does, is what makes us who we are. You don't deal with it. You use it perhaps to feel for other people who might be in dire situations. It makes you more human. That's the only answer I can give. I don't know if anybody has anything else to add to that. Viv, you wanted to say something.
I did want to mention at the end, and that is that in shining this light on Hungary, we also shone a light on the writer who obviously lived through it. And I was thinking about the Steven Spielberg movie, Schindler's List, where he has that little red-coated child who goes all the way through. And we all know that she symbolizes innocence. But in a sense, Bella Saltz, with his book and what I was reading, really made one individual incredibly real and authentic. And I cried quite a lot through that book. But I do think that it's so difficult to absorb the numbers as we teach in the museum. You can't cope with such big numbers. And if you realize that each person is a Bella Saltz in his own way, different stories, then somehow you can maybe, but no, you never understand the numbers, you never understand the tragedy.
Yeah, I agree.
Can I add something to this, please?
Yes, please, Pat.
When you work at the Holocaust Center and you're faced with all of this, you know, on a weekly basis, etc., I know that everything inside me has shifted from the time that I began there to now. And so that is, in a way, how one copes with all the sadness that one reads. It's life, unfortunately, you know, and life is full of sadness.
But Pat, I'd also like to add, and perhaps David, this might help, is that our work here is actually not about sadness. No, it's about educating people, because we get school groups here every day of the week, or we did before lockdown, to see the world in a different way and to be aware of things, and to, you know, we try and humanize so that we leave people feeling more human rather than dehumanized, and I think, and sensitized rather than desensitized, and that's the work that we do. And yeah, so thank you, Pat and Viv, for doing that work, and all the other guides who work with us at the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Center. And with that, I'd like to say to Viv and to Pat, what an amazing morning. I know you guys have put so much work into this, and you've done it so beautifully. We're getting so many messages through saying thank you and how much people have enjoyed this. The recording will go up on our website. And with that, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you at our next presentation. All the best, everyone. Bye-bye.